As technology advances at an unprecedented pace, the way we travel is changing dramatically. From flying taxis to Hyperloop systems, autonomous vehicles to magnetic trains, in today's video I'm going to be looking at 15 futuristic methods of transportation that will change travel forever. Let's begin. Number 15. Hyperloop. When it comes to futuristic transportation concepts, we really need to start with the Hyperloop. First proposed by Elon Musk back in 2013, the Hyperloop is one seriously high-speed transportation system consisting of a series of tubes or tunnels through which specially designed pods can travel at ridiculous speeds. So what's this pod we're talking about? Well, it's basically an aerodynamic capsule designed to carry passengers or cargo, which travels through the tube using linear induction motors and magnetic levitation. Sounds simple, right? Well, no, of course it doesn't, because this is one seriously high-concept idea. The whole point of the Hyperloop is for it to be fully autonomous, with the efficiency and safety of the capsule controlled by an onboard computer system. So could this change travel forever? Well, possibly. With its crazy concept of using reduced air pressure inside the tubes to minimize air resistance and increase speed, the Hyperloop has generated a lot of excitement and interest around the world. Faster, more efficient, and more environmentally friendly than a lot of other modes of transportation. It could potentially reduce travel time between cities by a significant amount, not to mention making a massive difference to the lives of businesses, commuters, and travelers. It goes without saying that one of the huge advantages of the Hyperloop is its insanely high speeds. This thing is capable of going over 760 miles an hour. Yep, that's almost the speed of sound. In other words, this could reduce travel times between cities by hours, possibly even days. Traveling from San Francisco to Los Angeles, for instance, which would currently take you a 6-hour car drive, would be significantly cut by the Hyperloop to a journey time of around 30 minutes. Unfortunately, there still are several challenges to overcome before the Hyperloop becomes a reality, including design, safety, and most of all, cost. Even Elon Musk doesn't quite have a bank account balance healthy enough to get this thing off the ground. Number 14. Vertical takeoff and landing, VTOL vehicles. So, speaking of getting things off the ground, we've seen all those classic sci-fi movies where UFOs just drop down out of the sky, abduct some simple country folk and maybe some cattle, and then just shoot up into the air again without the need for a runway. Well, that's kind of what a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, or VTOL for short, is. After all, the clue is pretty much in the name. It's like having a combination of a fixed-wing aircraft and a helicopter, providing the user with a great deal of efficiency and flexibility due to their ability to land or take off in small spaces. It also makes them ideal for more urban areas with limited amounts of space, not least because they can fly at low altitudes and avoid buildings and obstacles with relative ease. Well, why would you even want something like this in an urban area? Well, how about an emergency medical transport, or for a seriously stylish work commute? After all, we're talking about the future here, so the sky is quite literally the limit. There are a variety of VTOL aircraft, but the most common are multi-rotor drones, such as quadcopters, for instance. These are often used for videography and photography, amongst other pursuits, for which their size and agility seem almost tailor-made. Another example of VTOL vehicles are the tilt-rotor aircraft, which are generally much larger than multi-rotor drones, but also have two functions. In other words, they can operate like a helicopter or a fixed-wing aircraft, tilting their rotors to allow for vertical takeoff and landing. Currently used for transport and surveillance by the military, these vehicles are fast making themselves indispensable. Finally, we have eVTOL aircraft, which can do everything a regular everyday VTOL vehicle can do, except they're powered by electric motors and therefore much better for the environment, due to being cleaner, quieter, and possibly even more efficient. So if you've got a friend who claims to have seen a UFO, maybe give him a new set of letters to use and suggest it might have been a VTOL instead. Number 13. Autonomous vehicles. Many of the vehicles in this top 15 would look perfectly at home in a sci-fi movie, and the next entry is no different. So what is an autonomous vehicle? Well, in a nutshell, it's something that doesn't require a pesky human to drive around. We have a couple of specific examples of these on our list, but here's a quick overview of how this truly futuristic transportation concept works. Using a combination of cameras, sensors, and AI, these vehicles can navigate roads and avoid any kind of obstacle without the need for anyone constructed of flesh or blood getting in the way. The difficulty in talking about this subject, however, is that autonomous vehicles are evolving pretty much constantly, and the technology behind them is in constant development too. Some autonomous vehicles, for instance, can not only find their own way through roads and traffic, but can even communicate with other autonomous vehicles to avoid collisions, roadworks, and congestion. One positive outlook for the future of autonomous vehicles is the potential impact it could have for the elderly or the disabled or anyone currently unable to drive. The effect it would have on their independence and freedom can obviously not be overstated. However, as with most vehicles on this list, there's currently a downside to autonomous vehicles. While autonomous delivery vehicles or public transport or taxis could certainly be more cost-effective and efficient, the loss of jobs for drivers and other staff could have a huge effect. In addition to this, cybersecurity is a huge risk for autonomous vehicles. The last thing you want is for your driverless car to be hacked. When you combine this with the various issues, both ethical and legal, over what happens in the event of a crash, it becomes kind of obvious that these kinds of vehicles still have a long way to go. Number 12. Electric planes. We've all seen people flying remote-control aircraft for a hobby, planes and helicopters, which seem to be getting bigger and more complicated with each passing decade. But imagine if those planes were much, much bigger and could actually fly around with full-size human passengers. Well, you may not have to imagine it for much longer, because electric planes are a very real thing. Also known as e-planes, it's an idea that's grown increasingly popular recently due to their lack of reliance on fossil fuels, thereby reducing cost, noise pollution, and carbon emissions. These planes run on electric motors and are powered by batteries, which can usually be found in the fuselage or the wings. Much like an electric car, the batteries can be charged at charging stations, which are located on the ground, thankfully, although there's an option to use onboard generators during the flight itself, such as wind turbines or solar panels. Needless to say, e-planes also make significantly less noise and are practically silent, which means they could potentially be used over more urban areas, and that people who currently live near airports can start saving money on earplugs. But we're talking about vehicles from the future, so there still are some challenges. Using batteries, for instance, means they can only fly for a certain distance or a certain amount of time before needing to be recharged, and that could be as little as a few hours. Also, battery technology is currently very expensive, so it's likely that airlines using e-planes would be passing their lack of savings on to you. In other words, a ticket for an e-plane could be more than a little expensive. This may change over time, of course, so maybe electric planes could be on course to change international travel forever. Number 11. Personal Rapid Transit. If you grew up in the 80s, you might have had one of those toys which consisted of two little remote-controlled cars that you could send speeding around their very own racetrack, and Personal Rapid Transit, or PRT, is a little bit like that. In other words, PRT vehicles run on dedicated guideways between two very specific locations, but it does mean you can get there extremely quickly. Imagine a world where you don't have to wait for a bus or a train, where you never need to make the transfer halfway through your journey, and where you can simply request a ride at any time and be taken directly to your destination. Well, that's the idea of Personal Rapid Transit. Designed to carry up to 6 passengers, PRT vehicles rely on computers and sensors to allow them to travel along their various guideways. Perhaps the most obvious benefit of this is the positive effects that PRT could have on congestion. The days of being stuck in traffic would be a thing of the past, and less congestion, of course, means less cars, which means less carbon emissions. It is kind of a win-win. So, is this just an idyllic image of the future with no basis in reality? Well, no, because PRT systems have already been used in some pretty major locations, such as London's Heathrow Airport and Morgantown, West Virginia. But of course, there are challenges. The cost of building such a system, for instance, can be astronomical, not to mention the various safety concerns. But who knows, maybe PRT could be the future of public transport. Number 10. Autonomous drones. A couple of decades ago, you only ever hear the word drone on the news after the Army had used them for bombing purposes during a war. These days, however, drones are becoming more and more common, with members of the general public buying their very own. Otherwise known as UAVs, or unmanned aerial vehicles, drones can be flown via a remote control, as you've probably seen your neighbor doing in his back garden. Or if we're talking about the more advanced models, can be programmed with a predefined flight path. These days, drones are used from everything from military applications to package delivery, surveillance, and agriculture. There are YouTube videos of people using them to catch their partners cheating, which probably wasn't the use the creator of the drone first envisioned. Perhaps most importantly, drones can be used for things that are far too dangerous for humans to attempt. Think about the need to survey disaster areas, or to enter difficult-to-access places to arrange rescue missions. Drones can often go where a bulky flesh-and-blood human can't. Or consider the need to inspect power lines or dangerous bridges. The danger involved is pretty much irrelevant to a drone. Also, once again, drones can be very cost-effective, although this could come at a worker's expense. And if they become widely used for things such as monitoring crops or spraying pesticides, then it could cost people their jobs. Any more downsides? Well, yeah, a big concern is that of privacy. After all, the last thing you want if you're sunbathing on your back garden is to see that drone belonging to your next-door neighbor suddenly hovering over your head. Number 9. Maglev trains. Magnetic levitation. Well, it sounds like something a magician might announce he's about to perform on his assistant, but it's actually a system of using powerful magnets which enables trains to hover over the track, and this lack of friction allows them to reach some seriously high speeds, sometimes as high as 300 miles an hour. Maglev trains were developed back in the 1970s and have become widely used in places such as China and Japan, where their vastly reduced noise and vibration has made them extremely popular. Often used for things like airport transport or intercity commuting, the Maglev train's magnetic attraction and repulsion both pull and push the train along, creating a speedy solution to long-distance travel. But as futuristic as these vehicles might seem, the idea is to make sure they're around for a long time. You see, due to the lack of moving parts, there are significantly less things that can go wrong, so in theory, Maglev trains should have a much longer shelf life than most traditional trains. Needless to say, there are also less emissions, they use less energy, and they have special braking systems which can convert kinetic energy into electricity. So you could literally say that the Maglev train powers itself. Doesn't get more green than that. Number 8. Self-driving buses. Alright, so we've talked about autonomous vehicles in a pretty general way, but here's a much more specific example: self-driving buses. Using a variety of sophisticated algorithms along with AI technology, these incredible buses can make their own decisions regarding route, speed, and braking based on the traffic situation on the road at the time. This, combined with the various cameras and sensors, means that self-driving buses are able to react to situations much quicker than a human driver could, which sounds great in principle, but is probably not a great thought if you're making your living as a bus driver. All of this, alongside the fact that self-driving buses can drive at a consistent speed, means that passengers will spend significantly less time waiting at bus stops. Not only that, but they provide a much more comfortable passenger experience. Wi-Fi, silence, lack of vibration, charging ports — what more could a bus passenger possibly require? Unfortunately, passengers aren't the only people paying for it, and that poses a bit of a problem because self-driving buses are seriously expensive. The specialized roadways, the charging stations, the infrastructure needed for this to become a common thing — it all takes some serious cash. So maybe it will be a while before self-driving buses become the norm. Number 7. Solar-powered vehicles. We all love the sun, right? Well, it keeps us warm, gives us a nice tan, helps plants grow, and basically keeps us alive. Oh, and it's also relatively an untapped source of clean energy. Solar power has been around for years, of course, but as an alternative to fossil fuels, it's still pretty widely unused. Environmentally friendly, with no emissions and very little noise pollution, solar-powered vehicles are also very cheap to maintain due to having less moving parts than your average petrol or diesel-powered vehicle. This might sound like a bit of a pipe dream and completely unrealistic, but there's many people who are passionate about building solar-powered vehicles. Take the World Solar Challenge, for example, which takes place in Australia every couple of years. People come from all over the world to take part alongside big names in the automotive industry like Toyota, Ford, and many others to showcase their solar-powered concept cars. It goes without saying that if everyone drove a solar-powered car, then it would be an incredibly positive move for the environment. But just like everything else on this list, there are a few problems. Firstly, there's the expense, because photovoltaic batteries are not cheap to produce. Secondly, solar-powered vehicles require much more power than traditional cars, for example, to travel the same kind of distance. Oh well, maybe we'll get there one day. Number 6. Underwater trains. Now, the next entry on our list might not seem very futuristic, because one particular example of it has been around for many years, and for many delivery drivers between Europe and the UK has simply become a part of daily life. I'm talking about the Channel Tunnel, or the Eurotunnel, depending on where you're from, which connects Great Britain to France via a 50-kilometer-long tunnel that runs underneath the water between the two countries. Constructed in 1994, the tunnel can be used by both trains and road vehicles and takes a little more than a half hour to get from one piece of land to the other. That said, the Channel Tunnel wasn't the first underwater train or sea bus tunnel. The Seikan Tunnel in Japan, for example, has been around since 1988 and connects the two islands of Hokkaido and Honshu. The Seikan Tunnel is also around 50 kilometers long and is well known for being used by the Shinkansen bullet train, which can reach speeds of up to 320 kph. Once again, these trains are fast, quiet, with no emissions, and of course help reduce traffic congestion. In common with many things on our list, however, these things are expensive, and there are some very specific materials needed like corrosion-resistant steel and waterproof concrete, along with construction of safety measures such as ventilation systems and emergency exits. And this makes the creation of these things a seriously complicated and pricey process. How much? Well, the Channel Tunnel cost around $21 billion, and that was in 1994 money. Number 5. Electric scooters. If you've driven around any city center, you've probably seen electric scooters around. In fact, you've probably narrowly avoided running over someone on an electric scooter. Eco-friendly and efficient, the electric scooter has become steadily more popular over the past few years, particularly with people commuting, running small errands, or even just going on their way to annoy pedestrians as they weave in and out of the crowds on a busy street. They also go pretty fast for such a basic form of transportation, from about 10 to 30 miles an hour. And you might be surprised to hear that they often come with turn signals and headlights, mainly because people don't usually tend to use those. Other benefits are they are extremely easy to use, you don't need much storage to own one due to their ability to be folded away, and the cheaper models can be picked up for as little as a few $100. Sadly though, for electric scooter fans, they have limited range and are pretty useless when it comes to long journeys, so you're not likely going to see one of these things zipping down the freeway, and they have a growing reputation for being quite dangerous form of transport. More and more riders are being encouraged to wear crash helmets and strongly adhere to the law of the road. Not a bad idea. Number 4. Supersonic travel. If you're old enough to remember the Live Aid concerts of 1985, you might also remember that Phil Collins was the only act to perform at both concerts, one of which took place in London's Wembley Stadium and the other being held at Philadelphia's JFK Stadium. And how did he manage to pull this off? Did Phil invent teleportation just in time for the gig? Nope, it was all down to Concorde, or as I've decided to title number 4 on our list, supersonic travel. This phrase refers to any vehicle which can travel at speeds faster than 767 miles per hour in dry air at relatively low humidity, otherwise known as the speed of sound. And when I say vehicle, I am of course referring to aircraft, planes, which are capable of flying at Mach 1, possibly even higher. Concorde no longer exists, sadly, but it was flown by British Airways and Air France between 1976 and 2003, and could reach the incredible speed of 1,350 miles per hour, or Mach 2.04. This is how Phil Collins managed to cross the Atlantic in only a few hours, find his way to Philadelphia, and make rock and roll history. Well, the fuel consumption, the expense, the environmental unsustainability, all of these things meant it eventually had to go. When you combine that with a very public accident where Concorde literally caught on fire, it was time to say a fond farewell. Since then, companies like Ariane Supersonic and Boom Supersonic have been developing new supersonic planes, but there's only one name people will always associate with this kind of plane: Concorde. Number 3. Jetpacks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving firmly back into sci-fi territory. Yes, it's the part of the list that surely you've all been waiting for: jetpacks. Who of us can honestly say that we wouldn't have given anything for our very own jetpack when we were kids? Just take off like some kind of superhero and leave all our friends or neighborhood bullies standing around amazed? Weirdly, however, they've actually been around for years, and the technology isn't quite as science fiction as you might expect. Using jets of liquid or gas to propel the jetpack wearer up into the air, they're then kept there by either a jet engine or an electric fan, depending on the model and the era of the pack in question. And yeah, just like the jetpacks you've imagined in your wildest dreams, these real-life versions have had handheld controls, which, let's be honest, makes the whole experience a lot cooler than if some highly qualified rocket scientist has to control your jetpack from below. Jetpacks also use VTOL technology, which would make them very handy for use in urban areas, although it would be a little more than tricky to use a jetpack in the middle of a city without drawing attention to yourself. The first jetpacks ever developed weren't designed for everyday application at all. They were mainly shown off as stunt performances by the military. These days, however, there are quite a few on the market designed for recreational use, although some have been developed for more important reasons, such as firefighting or search and rescue missions. Number 2. Flying cars. If there are any Back to the Future fans watching this video, well, I'm one of them, then this section is specifically for us. This number 2 spot is probably the thing everyone most associates with visions of the future: flying cars. Otherwise known as personal air vehicles or PAVs, flying cars were a big part of Back to the Future's image of what 2005 would be like, and in a way, they weren't far off, because believe it or not, flying cars have been around for decades. And the benefits are pretty obvious, of course. You don't need roads, no other cars, no road rage, no traffic jams, no accidents, no roadworks. And of course, flying cars use VTOL technology to achieve this futuristic look, which means they can take them off from pretty much anywhere. The difference to the flying cars you may have seen in movies, however, are they are not usually built into a weird-looking model of an existing car. Some PAVs simply look like planes, which are part car, while some look a bit more like a drone. But how do they work? Well, basically it's a combo of already well-used propulsion systems and hydrogen fuel cell technology, along with a variety of sensors, safety features, and both navigational and collisional avoidance systems. So, what is stopping us from living in a world where we all can pretend to be Marty McFly and fly around in our very own DeLorean? Well, pretty much the same thing that affects everything else on this list. The world would suddenly have to deal with a whole bunch of flying cars around, and that would take a major overhaul of infrastructure, not to mention how driving laws and regulations would have to change once people are no longer using the roads. And how would the average driving test take place in a flying car? So many questions. Number 1. Suborbital travel. Well, I've saved the best for last. That's right, everyone fasten your seatbelts because we're heading into space. Now, we've already talked about the benefits of vehicles that can afford congestion and cut people's commuting time in half, but is there a better way to achieve this than by enhanced speed? Or specially built roadways, or a traveling underwater thing, or floating above the ground? Well, how about leaving the Earth's atmosphere completely? With suborbital travel, the spacecraft takes you up a couple of 100 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, but not high enough for you to go into orbit, hence the name suborbital travel. Orbital travel, of course, would mean that you're capable of orbiting the Earth, but this is slightly different. So, okay, this isn't strictly used for travel purposes in the sense that you go from one location to another, but it does allow you to reach a state of weightlessness as it drops back down to Earth, which is pretty cool. If suborbital travel were to be developed into a form of public transport, however, then the effects could be dramatic. A flight from Tokyo to New York, for example, would take no more than a few hours, as opposed to 14, which needless to say would be vastly preferable. So is suborbital flight just a flight of fancy? Are we just being ridiculous by putting this at our number 1 spot of transport concepts which could change the world forever? Well, that answer is a big fat no. Virgin Atlantic and Blue Origin have a suborbital spacecraft in development right now with the intention of ultimately using them for either tourism or point-to-point travel, although these spacecraft still fall into the same trap as most other vehicles on this list. Safety and cost, above all else, are things that seriously need to be considered if you're planning to take your next vacation via space. I'll see y'all next time.
Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.
The Top 5 show has launched channel memberships. Thank you to our channel members.